Welcome to Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we discuss Trump 2.0's policies and politics and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. In less than 3 months, Trump 2.0 has stunned the world with an intensity and impact surpassing that of his first term. Trump 1.0 was widely regarded as a turning point in American history, notable not only for Trump's unconventional presidential style, but also for his administration's substantial policies aimed at reversing decades of globalization and the U.S. involvement in global affairs. Central to many of the policy changes during Trump 1.0 were U.S. China relations. To understand how American companies have reacted to these pivotal moments and how businesses and organizations can prepare for the upcoming changes under Trump 2.0, we spoke to Kerr Gibbs on March 31st, a former chairman and president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. Kerr led the organization in representing the interests of American multinational companies during a time of great uncertainty. He served as a vital communicator for the business community to Washington, D.C., and with Chinese government officials. With his rich business experience, he edited Selling to China, a collection of industry stories detailing how foreign companies navigated the challenges of compliance with U.S. laws and policies while seeking support in China and access to the world's largest growth market. Welcome, Kerr. We're so pleased to have you today. And can you just share with us what your business background has been like with China in particular?
Sure. It's great to be with you, Wenchi. I'd be glad to share some background. My business career in Asia started actually right where we are right now, which is in Taiwan. I came over here right after college and ended up working for a small company that was doing, it was kind of a trading company, and it was representing foreign technologies and equipment here in Taiwan. And I worked under a person named R.T. Peng, and he ended up being a mentor to me at that time. And
what year was that?
This would have been, boy, I'm really going to date myself here. So I graduated from UCLA in 1985 and came over here on the Love Boat. Actually, a lot of people know about the Jiuguo Tuan,
yes.
that thing. So I'm Chinese American in actually the most true sense of the word. I'm literally, my father's American, my mother's from China. So I came over at my mother's request, I think would be a gentle way of putting that. But she really wanted me to come back to Taiwan. Is a very special place to her, and as is mainland China. So she wanted me to come here and meet relatives and those
so
kind
basically
of things.
in the mid to late
80s. Yeah, mid to late 80s.
Okay.
And Taiwan was at a certain stage of development, both economically and politically. As I said, this Peng Rongci is his name in Chinese, and he was a very important person to me personally. As my mentor, he really guided me on my career at many different stages, but he also became a very important person in Taiwan-Japan relations. And because Taiwan has a complicated history and a complicated relationship with all of these countries, as you know, both with mainland China, of course, and then with Japan and the United States. And so he played a very important role.
So by working with him in Taiwan, it kind of helped you start your career, long career with China as well. And so literally when Taiwan just started trading with China, right? Because the government didn't even allow people to travel to China until just around that time.
Exactly right. I mean, it was just coming out of martial law was
right. The travel restrictions.
Yeah, the travel restrictions, the so-called 3 no's. No contact, no nothing. So yeah, it was kind of in that period. It was also a period of time when Taiwan was moving up the chain of the value-added chain. They were kind of sick of making tennis shoes and umbrellas and Christmas tree ornaments, and starting to make electronics and now semiconductors. And so it was really at the very beginning of that route. And my route actually followed a lot of that. One of the first roles. So after working for Mr. Peng for a while, and then went back to the United States, went to business school, and then after business school, I joined a management consulting firm, the Boston Consulting Group, and came back out to Asia with BCG and did a lot of those kinds of projects. And so that was exactly the time when Taiwan was really starting the whole fab and test and measurement equipment.
So when you came back to the region the second time, it would have been what, in the early 90s?
Then that would have been early 90s. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you go to China?
Went to China.
Okay.
Again, not by my choice. It was sort of, it's funny, my career has been sort of reactive in many ways. I joined BCG in the San Francisco office. Okay. And again, got involved, had a mentor.
So what kind of business consulting projects did you guys work on at that time?
Well, great question, Wenchi, because the funny thing is, right, I joined BCG. I thought I was going to do strategy consulting and just really high level stuff. And, I came out of Berkeley Business School, and that's what all of us wanted to do. Some of us wanted to go to Wall Street and do investment banking, and the other half wanted to do strategy consulting. But working for Bob, again, I started there, and he literally put me on a plane that week to go to Shanghai. And no, we did not do strategy consulting. Nothing like it.
So what did you guys do?
We were doing very low level. I was walking through factories, doing quality control, looking at yields coming off of machines.
That's not low level. That's like still super important work for any business.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's important work.
Right.
I don't mean to say it wasn't important. Yeah. It was, but it was.
Especially at that time, that's what China's business was about.
Exactly. Yeah. China was in the business of making widgets, frankly. I mean, these things were switches, very simple products, but China was at a point where they just didn't have the processes in place to measure quality, measure yield, to see how to do those kinds of things. Inventory control was just non-existent.
Essentially, they don't know how to run business professionally.
But that made it actually a really exciting time.
I'm sure.
Because the people there, we're talking about smart people that had enough self-awareness to they realized that China was coming out of this, frankly, dark time. And people were just really hungry to learn, to improve, to adapt. And they saw what was happening in the West, and they wanted to take their part of it. And I have to tell you, Wenchi, to look back on that time, it was a golden age in many ways, both in terms of China's development, getting on that fast upward curve of productivity, but it was also a golden age of the relationship itself. And
the relationship between U.S. and China.
Between the U.S. and China. And, we were learning from each other. And it was just such a period of optimism and good feelings between the countries.
I think the roles were very clear at that time, right? China was coming out of, as you phrased, dark age, and the U.S. was eager to bring China into this global economic system. And so the U.S. at that time seemed to be the mentor, if I can put it that way, and China was learning, right, a steep learning curve to be a global player in a way. So I think that role, and China was very clear about its own role as well. So there was no real conflict. There was no competition because there's no confusion about who's who and who's doing what.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
From the 90s to, let's say, the 2010s, right? So for about 20 years of time, it was U.S. China working together, being part of the global economic system, the trading system, U.S. helping China grow and become the second largest trading partner in the economy in the world, right?
Yeah, that's right. And to kind of step back, and talk about, my career, which is sort of, in a way, mirrored the trajectory of business, U.S.-China business and U.S.-China relations. So I've kind of gone back and forth between Silicon Valley and China, and my career has really been at the intersection of technology, finance, and Asia. So after working at Boston Consulting Group, I went to work for Apple, and I was at Apple for about 6 years,
And what years were?
so that would have been kind of mid '90s to late '90s. I worked at Apple basically between the John Scully and Steve Jobs years. And I was all over the place. I started in Cupertino. I worked for a division at Apple called the Macintosh System Architecture Division, and so I was doing low-level system software kind of stuff, and then end up getting into business development and then corporate development within the Apple world. And so they sent me to Japan for a while, which was, again, that sort of reflects what was going on in Asia at that time. Japan was very much the place to be. Apple was doing just incredible business in Japan. We could do no wrong. So I worked in Japan for a while for Apple, and then back to Cupertino, and then they sent me to Hong Kong to run a software subsidiary out of Hong Kong. And so that's when I started doing more things in China. But
so after Apple, because you also worked in banking, and then when we met, you were actually in a very different role. You were the American Chamber of Commerce president in Shanghai. So what led you to that role, which is more of a, dealing with the government, dealing with the business sector as a whole?
Yeah, very much so. I think the American Chamber of Commerce, that's really almost kind of a public service kind of role. Ended up getting more and more deeply involved in the chamber, especially as the U.S. China relationship, frankly, started getting very interesting and complicated, and kind of got just deeper and deeper into the leadership in the American Chamber, and made a few trips to Washington D.C., which I found very interesting. And so that's kind of what brought me into AmCham.
Did you see this coming in terms of where U.S. and China would come to today, right? Because we talk about you started in the 90s, very exciting. As a Chinese American, being able to play a role in China's miraculous economic development, that must have been some kind of accomplishment, you would feel, right? Stepping back to have a bigger picture of what this all means between U.S. and China as the relationships became more and more, as you said, complex, complicated. How did that feel when you became the president of AmCham?
I did not see this coming. In fact, I think, to be fair, if you'd ask any of us who were doing work, here in kind of the late 90s, early 2000s, 2010, if you told any of us that this is where we would be, that the U.S. and China would be at each other's throats, I just wouldn't have believed it. In fact, I can take you back to kind of my first first feet on the ground in China, 1985, and I met my aunt. So this is my mother's older sister. And in China, in Shanghai, which is where she lived. And one of the first things she said to me was she asked me Kaiwen, so my Chinese name is Kaiwen. And she says, Kaiwen, 假如美国跟中国打仗的话，你要谁赢？ So like if the U.S. and China get in a war, who do you want to win? And if you go back to 85, that made sense to her. If you look at China's history with the United States and the conflicts with the West, that made sense to her coming out of that history. It made no sense to me at all. In 1985, the way I viewed China, the question itself shocked me. And then kind of getting into this business career that we've been talking about, things were going so well that I just saw no reason to think about those kinds of things, that type of conflict. You know, to be fair, you know, knowing now what I should have known then, you know, about the history of the countries, and you know, we have sharply conflicting political and economic systems for sure. So, you know, to maybe, you know, all that those good years, you know, Deng Xiaoping and all of those years of the 90s to that, maybe that was an illusion. I don't know. Maybe we were destined to get to this point. But either way, can't you quit? No, I did not see it coming.
When did you start to feel the heat?
Yeah, good
Was it
question.
actually until Trump 1.0, which is like 2017, or even before then?
Where did the wind shift first? Did it shift in China first, or did it shift in the U.S. first? And you
But
know,
tensions were there, right? Business tensions. Even back then, I kind of remember American businesses were complaining a lot about
a lot.
China.
You're right. You're right. And the frustration had really been building up way before Trump 1.0. I think Trump 1.0 is when kind of the gloves came off and sort of the hostility became much more out in the open. But you're absolutely right, Wenchi. I mean, if you go back to Bill Clinton, and you know, he's the one who brought China into the WTO. He made a very deliberate decision to set those issues aside in favor of trade, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't frustration and disappointment with the direction that China did not go after coming into WTO. In other words, there was a lot of frustration after Clinton with the implementation of a lot of the intellectual property. So if you go back to George W., that was more about currency manipulation, those kinds of things. Obama was still very much, you know, a pro engage. Yeah, IP was still an issue. I think the inflection point on IP was probably around 2014, something like that, where things got significantly better. But they had been getting better for quite a long time for a lot of different reasons. One of which is and we write about it in the book that a group of us has published called "Selling to China," and one of the chapters in there is all about IP and the evolution of China's treatment of intellectual property. But I think Obama, it was probably the promise fatigue and pattern of disappointment. So if you recall, under Obama, we were still doing things like the JCCT and the S&ED and all these, you know, huge,
a lot of dialogues.
A lot of dialogue. I mean, we were just basically talking each other to death. And, you know, hundreds of officials on both sides, you know, they would go to Washington and talk, and nothing would happen. And then that same group.
Some things happened. Yeah, I was actually part of, you know, that yearly dialogue as well. So would you say the frustration at that time was a lot of talk but no real action?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, that was the frustration. And I don't mean to say that nothing happened.
So when Trump came into the White House, beginning of 2017, you still did not see, or your AmCham members still did not see things turning so dramatically?
Not so dramatically. We definitely felt the tensions rising. By that time, the aggressiveness towards Taiwan. I mean,
China's aggressiveness.
Yeah, China's aggressiveness, and I mean that's been one of those things that it sort of ebbs and flows over decades. The South China Sea was a major, what really came into the fore in the tail end of Obama. And to be fair to the Obama people, I think there was a lot of disappointment and frustration on that point. And again, being part of the American Chamber of Commerce, which is a non-government organization, so I'm not part of the U.S. government, not beholden to the Chinese government either, which made me I wouldn't say a neutral party. It does have the word American chamber in it, but I could talk openly to both sides in Beijing with Ministry of Foreign Affairs and at the U.S. Embassy, where they would say, look, meeting between President Obama and Chairman Xi, he promised that they would not militarize the islands in the South China Sea. And I'd meet with the embassy people, and they would say, and they lied to us. The same day, I would go over to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they would tell me,
the same thing.
We made no such promise. We made no such promise. And by the way, the islands belong to us, and go away. So I think that issue has very much stuck in the craw. And again, one of my frustrations with Beijing is I'm not sure that they're very savvy people. Don't get me wrong; they're very savvy, and they know a lot about our system. They probably know much more about our system than we know of theirs. But they do seem to consistently underestimate the importance of certain issues. I'm not sure they really understood the strategic issues and how all these things are interconnected. They just say, look, there are islands, it's our sea, go away.
So what about on the business side? What were some of the issues that you felt, either side, they were not really talking to each other, or they misunderstood, miscommunicated?
Yeah, I think the word reciprocity is one of those things that has been a word that's been kicked around over decades.
And it definitely started with the Trump administration, right?
Yeah. You're right that Trump is the one who kind of ripped that Band-Aid off. But as far back as like Charlene Barshevsky, she'd been talking about reciprocity, the lack thereof, for quite a long time. And I think that the business community, at least the business community that's located, the U.S. business community that's in China, I think we underestimated the importance of that issue. In fact, I can recall conversations with Charlene where Charlene Barshevsky, who was the U.S. trade representative, would say, look, we really need to get to reciprocity. And I think we were so pragmatic, those of us working in China were more of the mind that said, look, China's China, U.S. is U.S. We're never going to get to reciprocity. It just isn't realistic.
Can you be more specific about what industries and what specific issues were, whether it's Charlene or later in the Trump administration, that they were referring to when it comes to reciprocity?
Well, there's so many examples. Just the New York Times, right? Media. We you can distribute China Daily in the United States, and China has hundreds of journalists who have operated in the U.S. We just don't have the same access, right?
And Facebook, Google, Twitter,
And to your point that you just brought up, which was Trump 1.0, and we can talk about the WeChat ban and the TikTok thing, but when he brought up the possibility of a TikTok ban with his executive order, which I think goes back to August of 2020, if I'm not wrong, and frankly, a lot of us on the TikTok side, a lot of us treated it as kind of a joke, because we looked at TikTok and said, look, this is a toy that teenagers use. You want to ban TikTok? Go ahead, please do. In fact, if you can help me rip my teenager away from their screens and with a ban from the White House, please do. So we didn't really take it seriously, but it's a much more serious and complicated issue now.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing about it is it ripped the Band-Aid off this concept of reciprocity. In other words, when he brought up the idea of banning TikTok, a lot of us looked at it and said, wait a minute, TikTok has 100 million registered users in America? Are you kidding me? And obviously Twitter, Facebook, how many registered users? let me just say real quick before we get too much hate mail from your listeners, there's two sides of this argument. There's the argument that says, wait a minute, Facebook, Twitter, all these, they're not banned in China. They're perfectly willing, perfectly legal to operate in China. They just have to operate by the censorship rules, which of course is sort of fundamental to how Twitter and Facebook and social media kind of operate. So it's a complicated issue. I just want to put that out there.
So we touched on the media. We touched on sort of social media. What about agriculture? What about law firm and some of the other sectors that sort of stood out during the first Trump administration that you felt American companies really got the hit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's never been a level playing field, and there's never been reciprocity. Beijing does not even try to make that argument. I mean, if you just look at the industry I came out of, banking, the banks, commercial banks, retail banks, the banks over there, the foreign banks over there are midgets in China compared to their local counterparts. Insurance companies, midgets. AIG, which had a very special relationship in China just because of Hank Greenberg and who he is and the long history that AIG has in China, kind of had special treatment. But even AIG had a business
difficult
there.
Time, yeah.
Not so much difficult time. They were deliberately kept small, and license. It's a both are highly regulated industries in all countries. Banking and insurance, but they were deliberately kept small. So in looking at the foreign banks collectively had less than 2% market share in China. And that's just crazy when you look at the size of these banks, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, HSBC. Come on, there's no way that they should have only 2% market share.
That's banking. What about auto industry?
Yeah, auto industry is a little different. The auto industry, and my co-author, Bill Russo, has written an amazing chapter in our book, again, called, if you don't mind me plugging my book.
Please do.
Selling to China. So selling to China is it's a work that it's a collection of chapters. Each chapter deals with a different industry and has a different author. And so Bill Russo has written about, kind of takes you through the history of the foreign OEM auto manufacturers in China, and it's both a success story and a tragedy and a story of kind of coming full circle. And I'm not going to steal his thunder because he writes a lot and he does amazing talks to explain what has happened. But basically, the U.S. brands and European brands have done extremely well over the last 30 years, but they kind of lost the plot. They missed. So I wouldn't say, just my view is that it's not the case of Ford and GM getting pushed out of the China market. I think it's more sort of missing the exit, meaning the ICE vehicles, the internal combustion engine vehicles, they just aren't the thing anymore. The market is going to new energy vehicles, and that is simply what the sun comes up on. And the Chinese OEMs and entrepreneurs, they saw that first and they made it happen. So yeah, the U.S. Foreign OEMs are losing market share at an incredible rate.
We've just touched on a few sectors as an example of how, whether it's reciprocity or simply, I would say, innovation or nimbleness, that made American companies feel that the U.S. may not be in a more advantageous kind of place vis-a-vis China. And so what we're seeing during the first Trump administration is a lot of, whether it's revenge, I don't know if that's the right word to say it, or again, they use reciprocity, right, is the word to describe it. It's sort of like we need to have a level playing field. We need to feel like we're dealing with each other on a more equal and fair kind of place. And being in China at that time, you kind of alluded to it, but how did China see all this?
Yeah, no, first of all, in the case of Trump 1.0 and China, I would not use the word revenge. I would use probably a word more like he didn't see the reason for subtlety. So, in other words, the Trump team saw what Clinton had done. He saw, and
Bush.
back to Bush too, and Obama, and they basically said, we just don't have patience for that at all. We are going to take an approach that's basically shoot first and negotiate later. And to link Trump 1.0 and 2.0, I think that's exactly what we're seeing now under 2.0 is shoot first, shoot way first, and then wait a long time for that to get absorbed, and then come back and think about negotiating. So we can talk more about that, but yeah, Trump 1.0 was not subtle. And another example.
I mean,
sure.
in a way, it's interesting you say it's not subtle, right? In a way, I've heard a lot about whether it's U.S. government officials complaining or American businesses, like for years, they've been trying to complain in private rather than out in the open. But again, they're not seeing the kind of progress they would like to see. And so, like you were saying, you just shoot first rather than sort of, hey, let's still talk nicely in public. And it seems like Trump 1.0 just didn't have that patience, right? Or they didn't feel like it would have accomplished anything.
Exactly right. I can tell you for absolute certainty, Trump and his team have no patience for that whole idea of, oh, don't
Nice
bring
talk.
issues.
Yeah,
Don't talk about important issues in public. Let's do this all in private. No.
Which was very much Obama administration's
Very
approach.
much Obama's
very,
approach.
very careful, giving them face.
And
all
Trump
that. Yes.
and his state didn't want to have anything to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, you asked kind of how the American business community kind of reacted to Trump, and I mean, we know that he's a transactional president, that he prides himself on this unpredictability and kind of keeping people off balance. Well, mission accomplished. I mean, that is very much what he does. I think history is going to have to judge that as in terms of, how effective is that? Does that get the results that we all want? We're in the middle of it.
But did the American companies at that time feel like Trump's policy was actually helping them, or did they feel like it is not helping? This is hurting it further.
There was actually a lot of I don't know if glee is the right word, but yeah, this whole idea of saying, no, China, we're not going to do things your way. We're not going to save all these points for private conversations. We're going to get it out in the open. There was actually, I don't know about glee or curiosity. It's like, wow, even those of us who did not support the president or not vote for Trump kind of sat back and said, hey, you know what? Nobody's ever tried that before. I wonder how that's going to turn out. Having said that, I do want to bring up an example because I think it is relevant to kind of bridge the discussion of 1.0 and 2.0 and what we have to look forward to. We kind of have to talk about the WeChat ban. And
well, please do share, give some background about that as well.
Yeah, and some background on that. Again, this goes back to August 2020. And we literally just woke up in the morning one day and saw that the White House had put out these two executive orders. One was banning TikTok, and the other was banning WeChat. And as I mentioned, the TikTok thing, we kind of laughed it off, but WeChat we did not. I literally that morning, I had the CFO of a major Fortune 100 company in my office waiting for me. He was frantic that the idea that WeChat would be banned, it just was unthinkable.
But how help our audience understand, right? Because not everyone uses WeChat outside of China. So how would that have affected an American company? Let's say
it would effectively be shutting off our air. So to give an example, I mean, WeChat, you're right, not everybody's super familiar, but it's so-called the so-called Swiss Army knife of the Chinese internet, meaning it's both a communication platform and payments, commerce, promotion, official
everything.
announcements come
Yes.
out via WeChat. It's everything. It's life. It really is. And it's the way we order our ride sharing cars. It's the way we get our food. I mean, it's just everything. So, but specifically, if you think about yourself as a retailer, and think of yourself as Nike, I mean, 99% of your customers are going to walk in the front door. They're going to be buying your shoes, and they're going to be using their mobile phone to pay for them. And if you think about that, if you ban WeChat, you're banning the use of WeChat payments. And again, the executive order said basically all persons and companies that are under U.S. jurisdiction. So that would include the Chinese subsidiaries of American corporations. Key point here, it would not impact the Chinese subsidiaries of other foreign companies. So if you're Nike, all of a sudden you don't have the ability to take payment to sell in China at all. Well, Adidas is right next door. German company, they have no problems taking money from people. So we had companies like that.
So before the announcement that you guys woke up to, was there any communication between the U.S. government and American companies on this, right? You would assume usually before they made the policy, they would at least consult industries.
To answer your question, no, none whatsoever. There was no consultation. But again, to the Trump administration, that's a feature. It's not a bug. It's how he rolls. I mean, he keeps everybody off balance. And to just kind of close out on that story, at the end of the Trump administration, I visited Washington, D.C., and so we were in the transition period. So the political appointees were basically packing their bags and sending out resumes.
That was towards the end of
Trump,
yeah.
Trump 1.0. And I had a meeting with a Treasury official and with Trump appointee. And the meeting was kind of weird because, as you know, that's a weird period where everybody's kind of in transition. Leaving. And I went, well, I just turned to the person and I said, look, I just want to make the point. Do you guys realize the WeChat ban and how that would have flipped us upside down, and working so hard as we have to carve out this market share that American companies have in China and the penetration into the consumer economy there? Do you realize what that would have done to our business? He turned to me and said, Mr. Gibbs, we knew exactly what we were doing.
And so they did not care.
Didn't care. And
what was the reason that they did not care?
I think this is a point that we need to be ready for and understand going into 2.0 is that President Trump is willing to put a lot of pain on the business community and certain sectors in order to achieve what he sees as more important long-term objectives. So that's what I took away from the WeChat ban is just to understand what they are willing to do.
But to what end? Because if you're not if your policy is not benefiting your businesses overseas, what is the objective of having that policy?
Yeah, well, in that case, in the case of the WeChat thing, it was supposedly national security, the issues of collecting data, using that platform to collect data on American citizens and things like that. And again, the courts have put a stop to that particular ban. The TikTok thing is an ongoing situation. I think we both know kind of where that's at, or we both don't know where that's at. But it is where it is. If you look at kind of what's going on here under 1.0, it's the analogy here is the tariffs. There is a long-term goal there.
What is the long-term goal? I want to get it out, because do you really think it was for the data protection, or there's something else?
Oh, in the case of WeChat?
Yeah. And both WeChat and TikTok.
Well,
right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think they, in that sense, they are part of the same thing. Hard to say. In that case, I would take him at his word that it was about data and his perception of a national security threat that comes from that data. I think that's probably accurate. Cynics would say, it was a way to kneecap the American businesses that were operating in China. There are people in Washington, D.C. These are the so-called ABC people, the people that say anywhere but China. And I would visit these people, on the Hill, and say, yeah, I'm representing, the American business community in China, and I'm here to talk about our issues. And these kind of people would say, yeah, ABC, anywhere but China. What are you guys doing over there anyway? I am unsympathetic to any of your issues because I don't believe you should be over there at all. So cynically, it's possible that some people would push, a WeChat ban would do that. Would affect certainly any consumer-facing business, Starbucks, Apple, Nike. That would be game over if you cannot use WeChat in China. It wouldn't. It would have less effect on some of the other companies, but it would be in effect nevertheless.
So the overall goal is much more than, let's say, decoupling in terms of the business sense, right? What was your sense from dealing with them from Trump 1.0? What was really the overall goal when it comes to U.S. China relationship? Was it we want to hurt China, or was it we just don't want to deal with China, or there's something else?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think there is a difference between 1.0 and 2.0. 1.0, I would say the goal clearly was the trade deficit. He was very focused on that, and
because the technology stuff didn't come out until very end, right?
Right. It came later.
Mm-hmm.
It was the trade deficit, and supposedly, he wanted to try to move more manufacturing companies back to the United States, and that was the tariffs.
But that's still more trade related.
Trade related, yeah. But I think you're asking a good question.
Because I'm trying to get at what is our overall objective with China? What kind of relationship do we really want with China? And from Trump 1.0 to Biden, you can say it continued and, augmented a little bit. And now to 2.0, it's expanded to a comprehensive approach to China that wasn't just about trade unfairness anymore.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that under Biden, he kept the export controls in place, or he actually expanded. He expanded the export controls. And, there was the so-called, small guard and high fence, which, we could sit and discuss that. And, a lot of people will say, well, wait a minute, that high fence doesn't seem to have any limit at all. And the garden keeps getting bigger and bigger. So what is this really about? But I think the Biden administration, tried as hard as they could to communicate the idea that, no, we're not trying to hurt China. We're trying to limit your and limit and not participate in your ability to arm yourselves and since the missiles are actually pointed at us, the last thing we want to do is put more semiconductors into the guidance systems. So that was really Biden. I think the communication under Trump, I think we're still within the first 100 days. I don't think any of us really have a clear idea, well, at all.
So we do want to talk about it, right? Just given the last 8 years of significant changes, and we always marked Trump first administration or sort of the pivoting, year. Now we have arrived at Trump 2.0, and there was a lot of anticipation built up to see what Trump's policies toward China would look like. And surprisingly, we still don't know. What do you think, or from what you hear from the business community, like what are people prepared for a potential even more expensive U.S. China trade war and beyond?
You're right. We don't know what he has in mind specifically for China, and people in Beijing, frankly, are getting pretty frustrated with that because they feel what is happening that we can all see is that Trump is getting ready for something and something big. In other words, he's shoring up his territory, if you will. He's sort of trying to consolidate North America if you look at kind of what he's doing with Mexico, Canada. And he's getting ready for something much more significant when it comes to China. People in Beijing are kind of frustrated because they don't know what his ask is. He's put these tariffs in place, but he hasn't really been. He's talked about fentanyl, but we've all been talking about fentanyl. These aren't big issues.
Not real big significant.
They aren't the significant things. He's looking for something much more significant.
So did you have a sense that he knows what he wants?
You can't look directly at Trump. You have to sort of look at what's behind Trump to kind of understand what the thinking is, what the architecture is like.
But how do we do that? The whole world is trying to.
Well, the way I'm doing it is it's almost like an allegory. If you're familiar with sort of Plato and the allegory of the cave, you can't look directly at you have to look at the shadow that's reflected in the back of the cave. So in this case, the shadow in the back of the cave comes in the form of two people. One is Robert Lighthizer, who was the U.S. Trade Representative under Trump 1.0, and the second one is a guy named Steve Myron, who is the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under Trump 2.0. I think between the two, they are you can kind of understand the architecture of the trade policy, mainly coming from Lighthizer, and trade and economics from Stephen Myron. And the picture that emerges is something that's very different from sort of mainstream economics and the way that we've been thinking about tariffs, taxes, the reserve currency, and whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. It's a really fundamental questions, and Myron is very clear on so where Trump is not in terms of what he wants and out of China. These guys are quite clear.
So what do they want?
So they're basically engineering and constructing an economy that's very much more self-sufficient and not dependent on trade. If you read Bob Lighthizer's book, he wrote a book called No Trade is Free. And it makes the case for utilizing tariffs as a tool to basically shift industries back into the United States and become not dependent on trade at all. So,
and the reason he thinks that being self-sufficient is important because,
well, I mean, he makes a strong argument that says, manufacturing matters. There's another really good book called Manufacturing Matters that makes the case that manufacturing has to be in this location, and then all the services that go around manufacturing also create the value in the economy. So self-sufficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically the opposite of what the globalists
Mm-hmm.
have been saying, and the benefits of trade that really go back to the days of Marco Polo,
Mm-hmm.
where the Silk Road opened up, and these trade routes opened up and created incredible wealth. He's flipping that around, and he's making the argument that no, what's more important is self-sufficiency. What's missing in the equation? So the way I look at it, the tariffs are a tool to get us to that point. The problem is it's Trump's way of going about things. It's not subtle. He just rips the Band-Aid off, and it's not clear to me and a lot of other people, how do we transition? How does that work? How do we get manufacturing back into the United States when we don't really have the right labor force, we don't have the right ecosystem, we don't have the right infrastructure? We're not a manufacturing center. Can we be? Sure, we're Americans. We can figure out anything. But how do we get there?
Mm-hmm.
And that piece is missing.
And are you seeing Chinese companies or even companies in the rest of the world more prepared for Trump 2.0?
Yeah, I mean, you can't fault Trump on transparency. I mean, he's very clear about what his plans are in that sense. So at this point, we are no longer sort of debating decouple. We're going to call it decoupling or de-risking. It's a fact on both sides, frankly. And here's the irony is that a lot of the hardliners in Beijing, not even just hardliners, a lot of people in Beijing are actually in violent agreement. They're saying, yeah, we shouldn't.
They've been preparing for
They've been prepared.
reliance
Self-sufficiency
yes.
has really been baked in to the CCP
Mm-hmm.
playbook for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an argument, back to our earlier conversation, there is an argument to say no, that Deng Xiaoping and this opening up, I mean, this was really just temporary,
Mm-hmm.
and that China's natural state is much more self-sufficient and has never really had a trust in the West, or and so they're going to go back to that kind of a situation. So yeah.
So it seems like both sides have been gearing up for more self-reliance kind of economy.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I would say on both sides they're moving in that direction.
And what does that mean for your typical Fortune 500 companies when they were so used to trading globally, acting like multinational companies for so long?
It's a very different business model. And again, we've seen this, it sort of started during COVID, but has accelerated after COVID due to a lot of these geopolitical issues, is that the large companies start operating much more in silos. And they basically have two businesses. There's one within China, and then one is the rest of the world.
And what's the connection between the one in China and the rest of the world?
As little as possible, starting with the IT stack. First of all, they can't share data. And they can't share data, they can't share IP, they can't share designs. There has to be separation.
What about reporting structure?
It's difficult. It's a real challenge. And again, it's counter to the fundamental business model that multinational companies have been operating on for the last 50 plus years, where basically you have a central headquarters, and you design once and build out and replicate your business everywhere.
Then why don't they just spin out and have a completely separate company?
And you are seeing that. So there, and again, and this actually started even pre-COVID. You started seeing companies separate like that. Some of these consumer brands, for different reasons. So Yum China, for example, is like that, where their China business is a separate publicly traded entity. McDonald's, they're actually a fair number of companies now. that started for different reasons.
What were the reasons?
Well, it was more had much more to do with capital markets and kind of trading multiples and the optimism around the growth and
China Stock Exchange.
China, yeah. So that's kind of so a lot of these things are happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's quite interesting. What about the Chinese companies? How are they preparing for a potential or even just U.S. policies maybe trying to exclude Chinese businesses or capital in the U.S. system?
Yeah, I mean they're doing what they can. I mean these are smart entrepreneurs that have a global view, and so yeah, they're hedging bets, and many of them are
Are they becoming more inward looking, or do you feel like they're more looking to other markets?
Yeah, depends on the business. It depends on the business. I mean, because there's also this nationalism that we saw. Actually, we saw a lot of that sort of coming out of the National People's Congress, the NPC, that happened a couple of weeks ago, where the party wants to know who's on the team and what are you willing to do to show your loyalty and these kinds of things. So you have to be inward looking and you have to be on the team. At the same time, many of these companies are hedging bets. They're making investments in Southeast Asia, in not so much India, but Southeast Asia, and trying to make sure that they have access to the North American market and European market. But they've got a challenge.
Well, it sounds like being a global company is not going to be as easy as before.
I think being a global company has different meaning now.
What would that look to you?
It's like I said, it's going to look like independent, like more like islands. So you'll have
more federation rather than
separated. Yeah. So independent entities out in China. I don't think they're going to. The China market's not going away. It's still an attractive market. It's still large. Always has been. Always will be. It's also very innovative. The innovation coming out of China is remarkable. What it doesn't have now, which it had before, it was always large, but it used to also be high growth and high profit. Now it's still large, it's low growth and low profit. So it's not going to have that same, it's not the shiny object that is going to attract everybody into that market. It will attract and retain businesses of a certain size that, again, that can create a little island to operate in the China market, but it's not going to be highly integrated with the rest of the global business.
So, from when you were the president of AmCham to now, if you're still in touch with some of your friends, perhaps, or business partners, for those Americans who remain in the Chinese markets, what are they doing now? What is their business strategy?
Sure.
So they're not retreating from that market either.
No. And again, there's so much emphasis on all the expats who've left, but the fact also is that there's a lot of expats that are still there, and many of them are running their own businesses. So it's, again, they were an island before, they're an island now. They don't necessarily depend on a connection to entities outside of China. So that's one pretty significant group. Yeah. But the other, I mean, clearly at the multinationals, the process of localization of senior management. I mean, that, again, there's multiple trends going on at the same time. That trend has actually been happening for quite a long time, of expat managers being replaced by local people. And so I think the geopolitics, COVID, and now the geopolitics have simply accelerated that trend.
Let's give some predictions, even though we're still early on in this administration. Other than tariffs that we know are coming, what are the other tools that the Trump administration will use to, have a more competitive economic relationship with China?
Well, tariffs is the big one. He's been very clear about that. He loves the word tariff. He sees that as the primary
We all
tool.
feel it because
We
he's
feel it.
throwing it
We
every
feel
day,
it.
left and right. Yes.
And again, if you read Bob Lighthizer,
Mm-hmm.
you see the role that tariffs play. But also, the flip side of tariff is negotiation. So you are going to see a visit between the two. That's been talked about for the last 100 days. We haven't seen it happen yet, but it will for sure. And Trump is very much a face-to-face kind of person. You are going to see clever maneuvering on the part of the Chinese team. Xi Jinping knows exactly who he's dealing with here. His team is extremely experienced. They've had 8 years or so to study the situation, so they know what they're going into. So we're going to see some interesting negotiations. My prediction in the big picture is, in the immediate term, meaning right here, and it's going to get worse, much worse, meaning more pain. Trump is softening the beaches, if you will. But in the medium term, or this longer term, meaning sort of 6 to 18 months out, once the negotiations get going, actually, I think the two sides are kind of compatible. I think they will find a way to resolve a lot of the trade disputes. Will it be to everyone's liking? I don't know. But we will find a way to have a relationship. China's too important. And Trump knows that.
Mm-hmm.
He needs America needs a relationship with China. That's just a fact. Long term, though, I'm less optimistic. Meaning, the deep ideological differences, the deep distrust, those kinds of things. Unfortunately, I don't see that getting any better. Certainly under a Trump 2.0 kind of scenario. Do we have hope to someday solve those problems? I hope so. But within this administration, I think I'm cautiously optimistic that within our 4 years, 3.5 years now, within this window, there is the possibility, certainly, of climbing down from an extremely hostile relate. Neither side wants an extremely hostile relationship. That's not good for either side. And again, President Trump is a pragmatist at the end of the day, and Xi Jinping, Chairman Xi, I mean, he needs certain things right now, so he has to be pragmatic because he's in a situation that requires that. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
Well, I do hope that your optimism prevails. I think in this period, right, like you said, because we still don't know what Trump's cards are, and China clearly is clever enough not to make the first move either. They're just, in my view, they're waiting for Trump to make the first move, so then they know what they should be doing. So it's an interesting time, and I'm sure in the coming 3+ years, we'll have a lot of content to actually discuss and trying to dissect and understand. But I want to thank you so much for giving us a very clear overview of the decades of U.S. China economic trade relationship and the pivotal moment of this change of relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know how clear it's been, but it's been a pleasure to be with you, Wenchi.
On April 2nd, Trump announced his highly anticipated worldwide tariffs, including country-specific reciprocal tariffs. In addition to the 10% tariff on imports into the U.S., 11 of the top 15 countries or blocs facing higher than base tariff rates are in Asia, including China, Japan, Vietnam, South Korea, Taiwan, India, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Cambodia. How will these countries respond? Stay tuned for further discussions. This is Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we analyze the policies and political strategies of Trump 2.0 and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. Thank you for watching and listening. We value your feedback. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and podcast. See you next week.